Hello, I'm Patrick Duhamel. My research project was media ethics in the classroom. I was particularly looking at how plagiarism affects our students, how the copyright law affects how we are able to do in our classroom and what our students are able to do in the classroom, as well as ways that media ethics can be taught inside of the classroom. For my case study, I had three main objectives for my research. The first one being how can we mold, create, develop new medias, both as educators and with our students, while still giving a fair amount of credit to those who developed the work originally, so as not to get into any legal trouble, especially when it comes to copyright. The second thing was how can we also instill ethical behavior while preparing our students with the skills they'll need for an increasingly global job market. I look at a few specific case studies when it comes to this. And finally, as educators, do we need to re-examine ourselves and our old ethics when we are collecting data for studies and disseminating it on web platforms, specifically when we're looking at student work and how we are presenting them? Okay, the first study that I looked over was Laurie E. Grice's Obama Hope, Copyright and Fair Use. This specific study went over the scandal that was behind the Obama Hope poster, particularly how the original creator, Shepard Fairey, had to endure a long court battle for not properly crediting the original source photo, even though some argue that he used it to create and enhance something better. Many people have argued that it is invading people's right to create new media through participatory culture, specifically in the fact that he may have had an original source photo, but what he used and created should be under fair use because he wasn't using it for monetary gain and he was using it as a form of art expression. Many platforms today use the case of the Obama Hope poster to educate students about when and how they can remix work while still falling in the lines of the law. Others use this as a debate on the current legislation and show students where there are some gray areas and how they can actively combat those gray areas when producing their own work. Either way, it opened up a very wide dialogue. So the Grise article connects directly into the next article, which is there to cover video remixes. For those of you who don't know what a video remix is, it's just simply when somebody takes a video and then online they edit it, normally to make some sort of a statement. The specific title of this article was The Pedagogical Potential for the Video Remix, and it's pretty much there to argue that remixes allow students to enter into a participatory culture, and they also give them the conceptual tools that are needed in the modern age, specifically with this new kind of digital media. She's also there to argue that there is a huge gray area in the current legislation, specifically 107 of the U.S. copyright law, specifically when it comes to video remixes, and the idea of adding expression and creating art. She believes that we need to both inform and engage our students around this debate, and that remixes can be a great tool and talking point as far as getting them better knowledge as to how the law enforces and. So as mentioned in the last slide, there is a rather large gray area in how the copyright laws are enforced. This can go from courtroom to courtroom, and it can even be differed by different judges under certain circumstances. So there's just this huge gray area that many are seeking to kind of make sure doesn't affect our students in a negative way. Specifically on trying to figure out how we should enforce this copyright laws and if there can be any changes into the way we look at it, specifically with education. So Nicholas Bramall wrote my next article, and it's called Copyright Reform and Educational Progress, and he lays out three possible changes that could make for better educational advantages when it comes to the copyright law. And I'd like to list out those three reforms now. The first one comes in the form of a digital student portfolio, which will allow students to archive, remix, transform materials, disseminate them over large platforms in a way that isn't subject to copyright law. So in this case, it would have to be a specific portfolio that the students could develop over an entire school career that would kind of go outside of the laws of the copyright. The second one would be a government repository, where items could be accessed, essentially items that teachers and school districts could use without the fear of having to deal with the copyright laws. It would allow their students to create and disseminate tools on this platform so they wouldn't have to worry about the copyright laws. And the final one would just be congressional law granting schools greater protection under fair use. Not much would have to change in this case because there is still parameters that allow students and teachers and educators to have a lot of fair use under the law. The problem is mainly how courts enforce it. They're just kind of looking for a more blanketed way to have educational institutions be able to be protected under the fair use. The next article I looked at deals with the issue of student plagiarism. It's specifically trying to figure out why students plagiarize and why they might be plagiarizing more now in the 21st century than they ever did in the past. I know plagiarism has been a big issue in some of my classes, and I wouldn't be surprised if it is for many of the other educators viewing this PowerPoint. So the article was entitled Rethinking Plagiarism in the Digital Age, and it's there to kind of argue that students plagiarize for two main reasons. One, we as teachers have encouraged them to do a lot of collaborative work. When it comes to collaborative work, it's oftentimes hard to pinpoint single authorship over an idea or a piece of writing that has been produced. This kind of gets exacerbated when students go online and they look at platforms like Wikipedia that oftentimes have more than one author, and it might be very hard to kind of pinpoint who gave a specific idea and when they should get credit. Another major issue is we as teachers oftentimes give students projects that we have a lot of knowledge on, but that they might have very, very little knowledge on. So as a way to kind of save face and have some form of self-preservation, they'll oftentimes go online and copy whole works or parts of works in a way to look knowledgeable on a topic that they oftentimes aren't, mainly hoping to get a passing grade. So to stop plagiarism, a few main ideas are put forward as to how to make some changes around why students plagiarize and hopefully getting them to stop. The first is to discuss with students why academics write and the awards that they get associated with. This is there to kind of give them some sort of a value as to why people produce works like this and why they should get the credit that they deserve in those students' works cited. Second, teachers need to start providing projects for students that are exciting and relevant to them. This can kind of ease the tension of them feeling like they don't know enough about a topic, so they can feel more informed and write more freely. And also they can research topics that are more interesting to them, so they'll produce better work. And the last one is arguing that we teachers should put checkpoints in online platforms to try to catch plagiarism before it becomes too late. So in the earlier stages of a project, before they actually put something forward to be corrected by us, in which case oftentimes schools and institutions have rather severe plagiarism laws. This will kind of curb that from actually getting to the worst ends. Keeping with the idea of ethics in the classroom, specifically around media, the next article I read was called Critical Literacy and Ethical Responsibilities of Student Media Production. In the study, Jessica K. Parker followed students in a documentary film seminar in their senior years in California. The area was quite diverse and it had many different immigrant communities. So she thought by doing this project, students would be greater involved in their community, but that they would also be greater connected to the material because it kind of impacts them at home, having many of them being immigrants or at least been associated with many immigrants in their community. Specifically with this project, ethics was taught because students were encouraged to get close to their subjects so they can kind of give them information, but not breaking the barrier and becoming too close to them and having that impact their film. They wanted to be objective, but at the same time have some real relevance. It was a pretty strong program because it went cross-curricular involving English, filmmaking, and social studies education, and it allowed them to kind of tap into these different medias in different ways. Furthermore, students were able to actively take part in the critiquing process. They were encouraged to look at films produced by seniors in the prior years so they could kind of critique them and get an idea of what good filmmaking looks like. But also, they were encouraged to critique their classmates so they could just get better in understanding what makes a good film. The last article I looked at deals with teachers and specifically how they produce their own digital research when it comes to student subjects. The study was called The Ethics of Digital Writing and Research, and it argues that there's a huge gray area in how teachers view student work and what sort of protection students get when it comes to online platforms. The study wants teachers to think more rhetorically rather than scientifically when it comes to determining how their work will affect online communities, specifically of students that they study. There are very few protections for student writing when on the web because it hasn't been published. So this is kind of trying to give some guides as to how teachers should protect their students. First, if they're working with a large group online, they should consult the group directly, and specifically those who they are observing. They need to inform them what kind of studies they're doing so they can have some sort of agency in what gets reproduced. The second thing they have to look at is each study as a case-by-case basis. What might be okay for some online groups might not be okay when it comes to exposing people from other online groups, and it's something that they have to be fairly cognizant of. Finally, the study advocates that teachers communicate with others in their field to make sure no harm is being done. They advocate that you consult a lot of different people, specifically in your field, to make sure that you're not doing any real harm to the communities that you're. Alright, now briefly I want to look at the conclusions that I drew from my research. The first being that students need to be drawn into the copyright debate, both as a form of protection when they're producing media, and also to show them how they can be advocates in certain parts of the debate, specifically when it comes to 107 and how there is a huge gray area there. Teachers also must use digital media, even though they may be putting themselves at risk when it comes to copyright. To not do so would prevent educating students for the growing digital world and globalization. Teachers also need to inform and destigmatize plagiarism. It's something that might have gotten lost over the last few years, but it's something that's important nonetheless. Teachers must also present dynamic lessons that relate to their students. Too often times, teachers are focused on presenting lessons that they already have a lot of knowledge on, but that won't inspire students. Next, media literacy can provide real-world ethical lessons, whether they're using it to look at plagiarism or if they're looking into new norms when it comes to producing certain things like the filmmaking project showed. Finally, teachers also have to look at themselves when conducting digital research for students and make sure that they are acting ethically, especially because the current legislation might not actually show how they should act. They need to be cognizant of how they're impacting their students and their online communities. Okay, thank you guys for looking at my project. I hope that this was informative, and please stay tuned for the works